In this video, we're going to start with a vanilla Compose application that we created in a prior video, and we're going to add some simple UI elements to that Compose application. So things like text that cannot be edited and also text that can be edited, which means we need to talk a little bit about state. Now, Jetpack Compose uses lambda expressions thoroughly, and it uses them in many different ways. So I have a separate video that talks about what lambdas are in Kotlin, and that video is specifically geared towards the Java developer. So I start with the Java method, I convert it to a Kotlin function, then I take that Kotlin function and I take a look at how we can assign it in a high order function, or in other words, we take a function and we pass it to another function. Then we decompose it further and we take a look at how to make a lambda out of that function. So that video is a really good prerequisite to this video. So if you have not watched it yet, I recommend you go ahead and watch that one, because when we jump into this video, I'm going to assume that you know what I covered there when it comes to Kotlin lambdas. And if nothing else, this video will be a great way to get some more exposure with lambdas in Kotlin. So let's jump in and take a look. I'm starting with our out-of-the-box Compose application, and as with most of the development I'm doing, I want to do this in a separate branch so we can keep this concept separate from the others. So before I do anything, I'm going to click down on the lower right where it says Master, and I'm going to choose New Branch, and I'll call it Simple Compose UI. Our goal is eventually to have a user interface that looks something like this, where we have a spinner at the top, and then we have latitude and longitude, which is fed from GPS, then a plant name, where is it, description, date started, and then a series of pictures, and then down towards the bottom, which you can't see right here, but there's a series of buttons. Now, we don't want to do this all at once. We want to be truly agile and focus on one feature at a time. Latitude and longitude, that will come soon, but not right now. The specimen spinner, that will come soon, but not right now. Then the repeating list of events and photos, that will come a little bit later, but not right now. Right now we're focusing on just simple so that we can get the hang of Compose. So we're going to focus on this part in the middle. As a matter of fact, I've broken up this user interface into some digestible pieces. So you can see that we're focusing on this yellow box here, where the other features we will focus on when we build those features. Now we're going to take, again, a simple view. So right now you see if I start typing Eastern, it will autocomplete. We're not going to worry about the autocomplete just yet because we have to reach out to some JSON data and we have to parse that, which is some complexity we'll handle when we get to that feature. Where is it is simply free-form text, so we can say Sawyer Point, just like so. And then description, that again is free-form text. Now date started, eventually we're going to do a pop-up for that, but once again that requires knowing dialogues and some other things which we're not going to worry about just yet. So we will make all of these simple editable text boxes. Not only is it a simple UI component, but it's a simple layout because you notice that we have one on top of another in kind of a columnar or column form. And that's going to be good to note in just a moment when we decide how we want to lay these out. Let's explore our sample application so far. We have our project structure to the left. We have our activity right here in the middle, which is where we're going to be doing our work. And then we have a preview pane over here. The nice thing is we can preview without loading into the emulator. However, it does require a build. If you want to stay focused on your code, you can simply hit the code view like this. Nonetheless, that's what we have. Now, if we take a look at the onCreate function, this is what we call a lifecycle function. This is invoked when the activity is ready to be shown to the user. So we start by calling a supercall, and then we invoke setContent. SetContent is where we define the activity's layout, and it's also where we call composable functions. Now, what's a composable function? Well, a composable function accepts data, or essentially some type of model, and it emits the UI elements, so we can put together the user interface programmatically. We need to annotate this with the @composable annotation, which represents this data in UI elements out relationship. Composables could be a different screen or a different part of a screen. Composables can create a hierarchy by calling other composable views. We can see how this hierarchy will be helpful for our application because it essentially is a hierarchy. At the top we have a spinner or a drop-down box that contains all of the plant specimen records that we've created. After that we have the location piece, which is a bit more complicated because we essentially have a column. Inside of that we have a row. Inside of the row we have more columns. And then inside one of those columns, we have more rows. So you see when I say column, row, think of a hierarchy of columns and rows that we're building up here. And then we have the part we're working on right now, which is essentially one column with 4 elements, and then we have more after that. So you see how the hierarchical nature of Compose allows us to build a user interface like the one that we see here. We want our view to be very predictable so that it behaves the same way with the same arguments and does not have side effects. So side effects would be something like changing or mutating the value of something unrelated, updating an observable value, updating shared preferences, so on and so forth. If we take a look at our screen layout, we see our set content, and then we see our myPlantDiary theme, which calls back to our UI.theme package. And if we take a look at theme, we'll see there's the myPlantDiary theme, which essentially puts together the colors, the typography, and the shapes, which are defined here. We will cover that in a separate video, so let's not dig too deep just yet. Within that now we have a surface, which is essentially a material design concept that means this is something where we can apply a background color, or we can apply a shadow or a border or anything like that. Within the surface then we're calling greeting. Now notice that greeting has this @composable annotation that we just talked about a moment ago, and it's essentially putting up a text widget. Below that we have another function with a preview annotation, and this is essentially a bootstrap function that says, okay, the preview window is going to see this, and then this is going to call the components that we want to preview over here. So you notice that the preview has a very similar look and feel to the set content that we have above, where it starts with the myPlantDiary theme, and then it calls the greeting like so. Now this is currently just a plain text widget, which is something that is not editable. For editable text, we need either a text field or its subclass, OutlinedTextField, which simply puts an outline around the text field. And we'll typically give it about 3 parameters. So one is the value, in other words, what should appear in that text field. Next is a function, or usually a lambda, that says what do we do when the value changes. And finally, we have a label, which is the description of the text field, or what should go into the text field. And typically we want to source that label from strings.xml instead of hard-coding it, because that will make it easier for us to internationalize our application. Also consider that we're passing data in, and we're allowing this user interface to take that data and decide how to draw itself. So we'll oftentimes have a remember block, which is essentially an initialization block for our text field. Let's reuse what we have, but let's make it a bit more descriptive. So I'm going to refactor and rename this and simply call it specimen facts. Notice by doing it that way, it changes also where it is invoked. Now, instead of text, we're going to say text field. Now take a look at our signatures here, and we know one thing that's neat about Kotlin is that we don't have to overload signatures. Instead, we can specify default parameter values for each of the parameters that we pass in to a method signature. So if you take a look at the right, you'll see the text field accepts value, onValueChanged, modifier, enabled, read-only, text style, label, placeholder, leading icon, trailing icon, is error, so on and so forth. A whole bunch of items, but many of these have default values. So what we can do is we can explicitly state the parameter values that we want to pass in, and everything else goes with the default. So if you see up here it says text equals hello name. In that case, with the old text component, we were saying let's take the text parameter and let's assign to it this value. For a text field, the ones that we want to specify in our case is the one called value, which is what the user will see. The onValueChanged function. Remember that Kotlin is a functional language, so we're passing in a function, and that function can be a lambda. And that function simply says, what should we do when the value in this text field changes? And then we also want to specify a label, which is essentially what the user sees above the application. So value, onValue change, and label. From this list of parameters, those are the ones we're going to specify. I'm going to go ahead and make this one an outlined text field. And note that it needs me to import it, so Alt-Enter will take care of that import very quickly. Now it still gives me an error because it doesn't recognize this parameter called text. Well, text was a parameter when we had a simple text element, but text is not a parameter on this outline text field, so I need to change the signature a little bit. But first, let's do a little bit of initialization. I'm going to say var text by remember, and then open curly, mutable state of, and then open and close double quote, and do a couple of imports here. Alt-Enter again, and Alt-Enter again. Now, it's the syntax that we're using here, again, is a little goofy because we have remember, which that is our initialization block for this component. And it basically means that we want to remember this value from one recomposition to another. Now, what's a recomposition? That's when we pass new data to this element and it has to draw itself again. So this is essentially an initialization block. We still have a red line, but not to worry because we have a hint that's going to help us here. We simply say import get value and mutable state of, and there we go. Now, I'll tell you what, on second thought, I don't like this word text. We keep using this word text, so I'm going to say for our plant name by remember. We can start to fix our outline text field here and make it visible. So let's start with value. Let's say value equals plant name, comma. Now remember, in Compose, we can specifically identify the parameters we want to pass in. Value is one, but there are a few more that we need to pass in. So let's pass in onValue change, and this is going to take a function. Remember that Kotlin is a functional programming language, so we have the concept of high-order functions, or functions that can accept other functions as parameters. And that's what's going on here. We also have the concept of a lambda, or a function that we can essentially write all in one line, and we can cut out any of the words that we don't need. So that's what we're going to do here. OnValue change equals, now open curly, and I'm going to say plant name equals IT. Now, if you're not familiar with functions in Kotlin, this one can be a little bit confusing because what's going on here? Well, onValue change means the user is typing something into this field. And the value that the user is typing is held in this variable called IT. IT is a special variable in Kotlin. If we have a lambda that only takes one argument, we can simplify things greatly by simply using this variable IT to hold that argument. Then we don't have to worry about function signature and the like. So we take IT, which is what the user is typing, and we essentially update plant name to what the user has typed. And finally, we can give this a label. Now, label anticipates a lambda as well. So let's do open curly, close curly, and then we simply can use one of our old-fashioned non-editable text fields. And inside of this, I'll say plant name. Now, right now, I have hard-coded this as text, which we know is a no-no. So simple Alt-Enter will extract string resource. And we'll call it plant name. And notice that's going to put it in strings.xml. The nice thing about that is we can have multiple versions of strings.xml so that we can support multiple languages for our application. Now, admittedly, this has gotten a little bit messy, so let me just clean things up a little bit with my tabs. And I'm going to build and refresh so we can take a look at what this looks like in our preview pane. It looks fairly straightforward in the preview pane. I've also brought up the emulator so we can see it here in the full context. And you see that it has the label inside of the field, and then as soon as I click, the label goes to the top of the field and I can start typing. A little bit misspelled, but nonetheless we see that sure enough at this point we have an editable field. So we can add a few more. We got the hang of it, so we can do a little bit of copy-paste magic here to make things a little bit smoother. So we know that we need one for location and description as well. So I'll simply copy and paste, and also initialize a few new variables that will hold the data that the user's entering. And now some refactoring. And we'll add one more text field for the date planted. If we look at the preview and also the emulator, it's a little bit disappointing because we only see plant name. What about these other things that we've created? Well, we have to add one more thing. We have to tell the application how to organize these. And we want to say that we want it to be in a column. So essentially we have one item after another. And for that we simply say column. So let's go above our text fields and column, open curly, and then we'll take the close curly and put it down towards the bottom of our text fields. Now, this is a very interesting syntax that you see here. Column is a function, but we're essentially passing all of this as one lambda, which just says, this is what I want the column to represent, which is why we have that open curly, close curly look and feel that you see here. And we'll import the column. Now, when we take a look in the emulator, you can see that we have each of these items one right after another in a columnar format. Now, can we stretch them to go the full width of the screen? Yes, we can, and we can do that with a modifier, which I'll cover in a separate video. There is one more thing I want to do in this video, though, and that is just make sure that we can collect the data. So I'm going to add a simple save button, and we can certainly embellish this more in some future videos. So we'll say button, and in the button we're going to pass an on-click listener. And that will accept a lambda expression again. Open curly, close curly. Within this, I'm going to issue a toast, which is a pop-up that will appear towards the bottom of the screen. Note that I'm using a little bit of Kotlin syntax here, where the second argument here is the string that I want to appear in the toast when it pops up. So I use a string with double quote, and then I can inject variables into that string using a simple $sign. So $plant name refers to the plant name variable, $location to the location variable, description to description, and date planted to date planted. So that's what the user will see. The first argument is context, which is simply tell me a little bit about our application. Now let me go ahead and import some things here. Context I'm going to use as a shortcut. I will grab that from localContext.current. So we'll make a variable out of that. I have a hunch I'm eventually going to want to refactor this and give this better visibility because I will probably use it in some different places. But nonetheless, that sets us up for there. Finally, we just need to say how long we want this toast to show. So I'll say toast, and then .show. We need to give it a label as well. So we'll say content, and then we'll use one of our text widgets. And don't let me forget the comma to separate the two. And because this is actually a lambda, I need to surround it with curlies. Now, look very carefully here. We're calling a button function. We're passing in an onClick. And then we're also passing a label that's going to appear on that button. Now, the label is actually a lambda. The way I've done it here will work just fine, but I want to show you a shortcut that often happens with Jetpack Compose. If the last argument is a lambda, we actually can take off this argument and simply have the lambda follow the call to that function. So this is a common look and feel, and it's a bit confusing if you don't know what you're looking at. So I wanted to show that both ways so you'd be a bit more familiar with it. Let me tidy it up a little bit, but essentially 6 to 1, half a dozen to the other. We could also put this on a different line. This is something we'll see fairly frequently with Compose. As a matter of fact, we have already seen it. Remember column? Column is actually a function call. And if it takes one lambda, then we just need the word column and then open curly and close curly. If you're not used to that syntax, you say, hey, what's this column, open curly, close curly? And to be frank, if that confuses you, don't worry about it. Just know that for a column, we have column, open curly, close curly. For a button, we'll pass the on-click through as a lambda, and then the label will follow in an open curly, close curly. If it's easier to remember it that way without knowing the science behind it, don't worry about it. Just remember it that way. Looks like I missed one more thing here. Looks like I need to import local context, so let's take care of that. I redeploy, and you can see that we have our different widgets, and we also have our save button with save on it. So let me enter some values here. Let's try it out.
So Eastern Redbud, Sawyer Point, beautiful tree by the Purple People Bridge, August 1988. Now when I choose Save, note that a toast pops up, Eastern Redbud, Sawyer Point, beautiful tree, so on and so forth. We're not actually saving anything, of course, but we can see this pop up here. As a matter of fact, maybe a little easier if I remove the keyboard. And that proves out our concept of being able to add some text fields and then being able to read the values that the user entered by making a button with an on-click. So this video has been an introduction to Compose and some simple elements. Of course, we'll have many more videos that go into deeper UI here, including modifiers, including things like drop-down boxes and autocomplete, but this is enough to get us started. So I'll commit and push this. I hope you found this video helpful, and as always, I look forward to reading your comments. Thank you.